Black halo.
Hello, hello. Hi, Naomi.
Hi, Dia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Always happy to
Doing
see you.
well. Yes, likewise.
And before we hopped on, we were talking about the hair. I'm loving the
Yes, we have the
full.
same hair going on. It's that era.
It's fantastic. The fullness. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes,
Every time I think about black halos, I think about afros and like big full curls,
yes. And
like
the
this
song,
type of halo.
the Afro Bomb
Afro
song.
bombs, yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
like I should come with an afro.
Absolutely, make it
The
full, make it
spirit.
beautiful. Well, I'm loving it, loving it. Please introduce yourself to the people. What's your favorite way of
Mm,
introducing yourself these days?
Yeah, how do I even begin? So my name's Naomi Stewart, as Dia knows, and we actually connected a few years back for one of her
Mhm.
shows, and an independent curator, writer, poet, singer, all the things you can
Mhm.
list there,
Mhm.
and primarily work on artist-led collaboration or artist collaborations with different residencies in the LA area so far, putting
Mhm.
on different shows and programming that really center on collective healing. And
Mhm.
Dea and I had worked an in-break in the past, the first cohort actually. um,
Yes.
and so a lot of my practice does and kind of interest moving forward is dealing with conversations about race, identity,
Mhm.
how we kind of heal from some of the things that have happened, not just in the past few years, but just in our lifetime as
Mhm.
young Black women. And I'm loving this Black Halos concept, kind of looking back and seeing where we are today and how we can embrace, our identities despite the
Mhm.
challenges we face. So that's a lot of all over the place, but
No.
definitely, yeah, just focused on those things in my practice. So yeah.
Mhm. It's pretty awesome. Also, and I know you're sometimes low key about your vocal abilities, but you have quite a lovely voice. Every once in a while, you'll like sneak it in. You'll post a song or
Yes.
something. Yes, and I know like you play a little bit of the guitar as well, right?
Yes, I play the guitar, other fun things. I like the beach,
Mm-hmm.
I like to roller skate. So just anything
Mm-hmm.
creative or getting me out of my own head
Mm-hmm.
is what I enjoy doing. So
Absolutely. Well, I primarily want to talk about your curatorial practice,
mhm.
but I'm also curious about how your own creative energies, your own creative
Mm.
outputs influence the work that you're doing with other artists. Just tell us a little bit generally about your journey into curatorial work.
Yeah, it's a little bit off the beaten path. I got my undergrad. Well, I've always had interest in art history since high school. Just learning
Mm-hmm.
about the impact of art through history and how artists have used their voices to really define the times and sort of their own processing of themselves and what was going on around them. So I've always had that interest in the arts, although I was primarily expressing that via poetry and music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then into college, getting my undergrad from Hawaii Pacific University, focusing on anthropology, art history, Spanish. Again, trying to have a good understanding of people and cultures. So that's always been tied into my interest in subject matter as a creative. And learning about the different narratives and stories that are that exist amongst each other, especially those voices that we may not hear about, in just modern education or normal education. Um, Coming out of my undergrad, I did work like in a local gallery during that period, but I knew coming out I did want to um, get experience working in the arts. Given that I didn't have any traditional education in curatorial studies or anything like that, or even art history, it was just my minor. I just took it upon myself to insert myself in a lot of spaces in the Los Angeles area afterwards, and sort of started via the Torrance Art Museum and their
Mm-hmm.
volunteer residency program for emerging or up and coming artists, curators, writers, people who wanted to get that professional development. And so through that, I was able to connect with quite a few people in the LA area who already have either are working or are interested in working, and from that sort of birthed the different opportunities to collaborate on exhibitions and projects throughout since 2020. So one was with Dia, an emergent with Super Collider, which is a sci-art collective, and that again focuses on like the human experience, healing, those sorts of topics through art making. And then another show, a show at Angel's Gate, again with another group of artists, and into Inbreak, which was quite the experience in working with a smaller subset of artists, meeting with them weekly and really getting to see, and that's my favorite part, like meeting with artists and getting their vision, having their visions come to reality in alignment with my methods, I guess, as a curator. A lot of it is those conversations that kind of guide the process for me. So I've been able to kind of grow and really just build on those connections year after year. And then the most recent show I did was, again, with Super Collider, collaboration with Super Collider at the Juan Zimmer Gallery out here in LA, another group show this last fall. So A Time to Tear, A Time to Mend, again, focused on sort of the onslaught of information that we're dealt via social media, via the news cycle, the traumas that we, don't really choose to see, but are just present there. And so how do we begin to metabolize those via art making and our creative practices? So that was the focus of that exhibition. But yeah, it's a little bit about sort of my journey, kind of bulleted there. But a lot of it has been very rewarding. I like to call myself just a sponge, trying to learn as much as possible because I am passionate about this work and working with artists. And so, yeah, connecting with Dia was one of the better moments throughout that journey, just because we've been consistently connecting and creating. And even so, I have ideas, Dia, things that I like to do. Yeah, I know you're busy, but yes. So that's a little bit about the journey so far up to this point.
I love hearing about it too, because I feel as though the title curator is one that not a lot of people are as familiar with. And actually, what I want to do is take a step backwards and hear from you, like how you would even describe the work that you're doing. Because, those of us who are a little bit more in depth in terms of the art circle and the art industry, we have a very particular idea of what a curator does. But those who maybe aren't as familiar, they might just picture someone in like an office and a museum, just kind of tucked away, but not really understanding the intricacies of curatorial work. So how would you describe your practice, if you will, curatorial practice?
Yeah. So in the projects I've worked on, it's usually we've already had a set of artists selected. But for a couple of the projects I've worked on, a lot of what the curator does is sort of select those artists or artworks, conduct studio visits. In my process, I really like to collaborate and have those conversations before even finalizing, okay, this is my vision for the statement, or here's where I need to flesh it out depending on the artists that I'm including in a show. So usually it starts with an idea or an artist in mind or a group of artists, and then sort of through conversation in writing and additional reading research that I do on my own, bringing together just some themes and ideas, even connecting art history and things like that in alignment with the works. And from there, you create that curatorial statement or some of those texts that you might see if you go into a gallery setting or a museum that unify the works being presented. So that's the bulk of a lot of the work, is that initial stage of conversation, research, going back and forth and on the different works. And then from there, if I already am working with a gallery, or maybe I'm submitting a proposal to work with a gallery, if it's accepted, then we get the space to work in. And that's the next stage, is how do we visually present or design this experience for visitors, so to better communicate those words or those ideas that we've discussed via those conversations. So a lot of it is like exhibition design, placing works, painting walls, doing things, creating different ways to showcase the works. So I've worked with, sculptures, AI technologies, digital video projection. So I work with the whole gamut. I'm not necessarily focused on one type of art or artist. I usually welcome all media the artists that I work with. And in that designing, we have, again, additional conversations about the experience and who's our audience and what will be the best way or creative way to communicate this idea. Beyond that, after kind of creating that vision, we install the works, of course, with the artist. And I usually am, usually on site with artists to facilitate that. And then I like to have additional programming along when the exhibition opens. So from the opening, usually that's people coming in, seeing the works. Maybe we have some more virtual experiences. I know with the In-Break show, at that time it was still COVID. So we had just a virtual exhibition experience that viewers can go, or visitors can go online and kind of experience that. I've had other ones where you create an avatar and you go to like a 3D world, kind of like the metaverse, which I think you remember. So just thinking of different ways and being flexible with the times. Luckily now we have access to our brick and mortar spaces, which is even more fun because, art in person is just so needed and just a whole other experience. So now we have no limits. We can really do a lot there. And with that, having supplemental programming. So whether that's artist-led workshops, artist talks, curator panels, usually I'm planning and helping facilitate that along with either another curator or the artists that I'm working with to make that happen. So there's a lot that goes into it, but each step of the process is just so rewarding. And, you see kind of those initial conversations evolve as things are coming together. And even beyond, usually like if it reverberates or lives on in reviews or whatnot, or additional talks or leads to other opportunities, that's really the most rewarding part of the process, is that did we make an impact, or what did this touch the people who was intended to touch? I know Liberty Worth, just name dropping, that comes to mind, sort of initial conversations we had at In-Break and that residency. Obviously going through that process curatorially, creating that show, her workshop, and now seeing what she's been doing beyond that, what she's been doing is lived on. So I love that process, seeing how it lives on, because art is, it's not just to be looked at on a wall. It really is an experience. It really is a tool, a medium in which we can process life and move through this world, this big world, and all that's going on. So that was the long and short of it, of sort of that.
It's perfect. It's so good. And the reason why I wanted to highlight it is because I think people don't actually understand how much goes into a curator's job. It's much more than just like getting some paintings up on a wall. There's an entire ideology, entire thought process happening behind each and every exhibition, and behind each and every event associated with the exhibition, and behind each and every like written release or whatever it might be. Everything is very much so about intentionality. And I think that people don't always realize the details, the details that go into each project and collaboration. What I love about your work is that you do take a very collaborative approach. And ideally, any curator would want to have this sort of partnership with the artist or artists that they're working with. But I find that you do this very particularly, and you are very much so about trying to get at the essence of what the artist is developing. I love how you are intentional about creating the relational aspect with your artist, and I think that that's something that we could use a little bit more of. Sometimes it does come just about the concept that a curator might have, or just this idea, and they just kind of want the artist to fit into the slots, if you will, so to speak. But what I've seen you do over the past couple of years is really like lean into what the artist's process is like. Like you'll go to someone's studio and you kind of see how they're thinking about things through their materials or their mediums. And I love that you really seem to center the person, whom it is that the actual artist is. And I really have appreciated that about your work, just really appreciated that.
Yeah. And a little on that. I mean, not to say there's a right or wrong, because,
Sure, of
certain
course, of course.
goings have different purposes. But again, like my ethos, or kind of what drives me, is that human connection, and connecting people with the artworks and beginning those conversations. So I feel like, yeah, this is a lot easier if I already have some sort of relationship with the artist, a good understanding of what they're doing and why. And even before, when I was just, high schooler, going to museums and learning about art history, I was always like, well, why? Like, this is the painting, great, but what's the story behind it? Who created it? What led them to this point? So those are questions back then that I still ask artists to this day. And I think that really creates fruitful discussions, and, helps kind of build out those ideas that, and in doing so too, I mean, I don't know, I can't say for every visitor, but being able to identify with the works, I have people who aren't in art space, and they go and they're like, I don't know what this is. It looks cool. But being able to kind of push a little further and tease it a little bit more out to help them identify a little bit with what's being presented,
Mm-hmm.
is really important. So yeah, just the human relationships in general is kind of key
Mm-hmm.
in moving in life. I don't think we're meant to just,
Mm-hmm.
produce and stop and,
Yes.
just for our own gain. That's what helps art kind of live on in my mind, and creatively too inspires me to keep moving forward in my own, personal expressions of, through poetry and whatnot. So
Absolutely. I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about that connection between viewer, audience, whatever the medium might be, and the artwork itself. Like, as a curator, what are you seeking to generate? And this is where I think curators really shine. Like, there's a middle space between the artwork and the viewer or the audience, and it's really like the curator's job to kind of bridge the gap, from my perspective, to help the audience to just kind of usher them into the experience, if you will. And so I would love to hear you talk about that in between space, before the
mm,
audience is able to like really connect with the work. Like, what's the work that you're doing to help them to find a story or find like something that they would resonate with? What's
mhm.
that work happening?
Yeah. So, I've only done so many, so it's still kind of a learning and testing and seeing what works best or what sticks. But I find that, that intentional programming or outreach really helps bring the work to life,
Mm,
more than just, say, having it on the wall. Not every gallery I've worked with, but I do, some do allow like didactics, so basically the text alongside the works.
mm-hmm,
That's really important to me. So if I can't have it there, I will have the write-ups
mm-hmm,
available, encouraging the gallery attendants to, usher people to view and read what each work is about and kind of how it all connects.
mm-hmm,
So far it's really been that I'm interested moving forward in the next stages, really incorporating all five senses somehow. So a full
mm-hmm.
sensory experience,
Yeah.
beyond, again, just the viewing of the works, but, incorporating all five senses and making it more somatic. So when you enter, you have to confront what's there. So I'm really interested in those types of works as well, and seeing what can be done, moving forward. So a lot of the artists I'm interested in working with, have, again, different mediums, but is there a tactile element or something you can see or
Mm-hmm,
feel or hear or even taste or smell,
mm-hmm.
as a part
Absolutely.
of it? So I feel like, yeah, that connection, and again, like I said, those conversations. So, it's easiest through programming or artist workshops, for people to actually
Mm-hmm,
come and work with, those artists who did create the work. So making it more accessible.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always tell people that immersive installations are my absolute favorite. Like, I love anything that allows me to be involved in the work in some capacity.
Mm,
I do think about like the kind of popular exhibitions that are, or installations rather, that are
mm,
like of the Van Goghs and the sort of digital works that they have, those kind of immersive
yes.
experiences. I find them very beautiful. And there's this one Team Lab that I think is based in Japan. Oh my gosh, I love
Oh,
what they
yes.
do. Like, it's just
Mm-hmm.
incredible, and I would love to see art to continue to move in that direction. I mean, given the resources that you have, it takes quite a bit to
Right.
produce those kinds of things. But even in the current form of Black Halos, like the exhibition form, we do have this thing called the making wall, which I really, really love. It's like my favorite part of the
Mm-hmm.
exhibition, actually, where basically I set up a couple of different frames. Myself and a couple other people set up a couple of different frames, and I laid out some materials, some different like yarns that people could use, and didn't leave any instructions, and just kind of said, go forth and do and see what you make. And
Mm-hmm.
I love what the public has created so far. Like there's this whole there are two walls and they've just like completely filled it with like yarn and string, and it's just really beautiful and lovely. I love to see what the public comes up with, without having to be overly directed. I'm really about this sort of collaborative space of making. And Break is all about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can we do together as a community? What can we build that otherwise we would not be able to do on our own?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my favorite part of the
And I also
entire
think, yeah,
experience.
like, again, our relationship has inspired me
Mhm.
to push the boundaries in a lot of ways, and how I approach, again, bridging the gap between viewer and artwork and artist. So a lot of that I can attribute to you. And then just an example too, and a time to tear, a time to mend. We had an
Mhm.
artist. Her work, Erin Cooney, fixated GoPros to her body or to her feet. I'm sorry. And she created a maze in her apartment during the stay-at-home
Amazing.
orders, and basically was navigating that maze and kind of crawling every space in her apartment, to kind of show, okay, this is my new space, this is my new world. How can
Mhm.
I how can I understand the space that I'm in? What is like the history?
Mhm.
Maybe it reflects more on me and with my relation with me to my space. And offshooting from that, we did have a workshop during the exhibition run where participants were able to affix a GoPro to their body at any point, and
Oh
we
my
took
gosh. So
uh,
fun.
a mindfulness walk through the park and
Ugh.
considering prompts regarding, the indigenous tribes who were there, the Angelinos who had come before us, and people were able to kind of reflect out loud. So she had created this, again, collaborative artwork at the end that we had
Mm.
screened, with everyone's videos, and a bit about what they were speaking about regarding,
Incredible.
what they had saw, what they had noticed. So yeah, just back to other ways to bring that artwork to life, or really connect back to the world around us, I think is
Mhm.
the next step, not just viewer to artwork, but that also inspiring viewer to act and do things. And I
Mhm.
think you do that very well through Inbreaker, and so that's been an inspiration for me. I'm like, we have to include something like this.
That's so good to hear. I feel like that's the same thing. I feel like it's the next step because what I've kind of found is that sometimes people who are not as familiar with art in general sometimes seem like they feel a little bit lost, like they
Mhm.
go look at a work and, oh, that's pretty, and then move on. But it's like, oh wait, there's so much more here that is offered to you. But I find that sometimes there's a little bit of bridging work that's needed for people to really be
Mhm.
able to engage with the work to the fullest of its capacities. And then once we're able to kind of invite people into like an artist process, so much begins to open up, so many other discoveries and possibilities. Because for me, it's really, and this is really what Inbreak is about, it's really in the process of the making that you really begin
Mhm.
to discover like what's embedded within the work itself. It's the
Mhm.
final outcome is great. It's also an experience and very important, but there's so much more, so many different layers.
Mhm.
But you said something that there's another project that you worked on. It was during the pandemic, and it was like an audio based project, and they had like a map. I don't remember the name of it. But do you remember what I'm talking about? Like
Mhm.
you recorded something, and there was like a virtual version where you could click on a map, and then you would hear somebody's recording. Do you know what I'm
Mhm.
talking about?
Yeah, so I didn't curate that project, but Ashton Phillips,
You
they or he,
participated in it.
I did participate in it. Yes,
Yeah.
that was incredible. So essentially, it was an installation in the park with these metal discs, and
Mhm.
basically those metal discs were picked up via GPS or satellite, through this app, and so we each recorded. I think, well, it was like long form interviews, and then he had taken he or they had taken clips from those interviews, and all had to do with experience via COVID. I think my portion was more focused on the creatives and pandemic series. Well, this is a throwback. Creatives and pandemic series that I had done during COVID. It was an online kind of virtual exhibition that I had done, but he had participated in that with a different work, and so that audio, again, I loved it because it you had to go outside, you had to listen in to, and as you walk towards the different discs, it would play the next, audio or interview portion. So that was really, really incredible.
It was beautiful to experience too. So to try to paint the picture, there was this virtual map basically of, like, if I'm not mistaken, the LA region, LA area.
Mm-hmm.
And you would have these little like pins that you could click on, little, not exactly pins, but pins you could click on. And then once you did, you were able to listen to, like what Naomi did, like the recordings of those interviews. And it would kind of tell the story of where each person was and what they were thinking about during the pandemic. And I just remember thinking that it was such a, the word unifying comes to mind, but that's not exactly what I mean. But it had a way of making you feel a little bit less alone. Like you're hearing what other people are going through, and you're like, oh, it's not just me thinking thoughts, because it was just such a wild time. And to have that human connection, even in the virtual format of like the human voice speaking to you about what we were all collectively experiencing, even though each person's experience was very nuanced, but collectively we all went through something. And so to hear other people kind of touching on things that maybe you yourself were feeling, I just remember being so touched by the process of it. Then your voice, like recognizing someone's voice in the process too, was very moving for me. So it wasn't just a stranger; it was someone whose voice I had heard before. But there's just an intimacy to it that I really appreciated. Quite beautiful.
Yeah,
really lovely. Yeah,
definitely.
For sure. So,
go ahead.
No,
just
please.
note on, because it's taking me back to that time in Creatives and Pandemic. That was a online exhibition series I had done where I basically did a call for artists to submit basically what are you working on, or getting that feedback. So similar to what Ashton had done. Again, beautifully presented. I just was like, hey, let's share what people are doing. And I do it through my Dokes Exhibit Instagram. So people were sharing, oh, this is what I'm working on. So again, having those conversations, being able to see, again, it's really connected to what I enjoy doing. Beyond like the artwork, even just the person behind it. Like we had some really intense conversations about even some people saying, I'm not making anything. How can you make anything right now? There's too much going on, versus like, I can't do anything but make. And so just seeing how people, again, process what's going on around them and how art can be used as a vehicle for that is really amazing.
And I like that you're noting that each person's process is very different. Some of us do tend to try to access creative mediums as a way of processing, needing to get out the thoughts and the feelings through some sort of tactile, embodied means. And others of us need time to collect our thoughts and our feelings before we can then turn something over into the work itself. And neither is better or worse, it just depends on where each person fits and where they find their own flow. I do want to hear about how you started to weave in identity and race in your work. I don't want to make any unnecessary assumptions about it. I would rather approach it as something that you maybe had to come into, or was it that you were always interested in race and identity even from the beginning of like your art interests and your curatorial interests? How did that come about for you?
Yeah, so I would say bird's eye view. I was, again, anthropology background. My interest was really humans. It's very broad. And making sure that those voices that weren't heard were being heard, or if I didn't know enough, looking further. Little background just on me. I grew up in kind of a white evangelical space, white suburban space. And so being a Black girl and having to kind of oscillate between myself being fitting into those spaces while also sort of proving Blackness, and even in the way that I speak. And I know I have notes on this for like when we get into the Black Halos discussion, but just finding my identity in that sense was very difficult. And so I think I've always sort of placated any sort of Blackness or overly Black, whatever you want to call it, growing up. And so that, I think that did inform my creative process early on, just kept it very individual. And then entering into those spaces, seeing how some of those conversations could be charged, and again, being concerned with myself and that perception of me. I guess you call it playing safe or keeping it broad. And so it really wasn't until sort of coming out of my undergrad and starting to speak with artists and, seeing the trending, what was basically fair game at this point, or popular, or okay. I think it took me a little bit of nudging and a couple of hard lessons to fully embrace this idea of addressing race in my own experiences with racism. I think the In-Break residency really helped me confront a lot of those things that I've been confronting along the way, but confront a lot of those things internally and with the church even, and understanding my role, or sort of like what I feel now I need to address more specifically in my practice. And so even obviously to the deep into the new project we did in Break, into Time to Tear, Time to Mend, focusing on some of those social justice issues, issues with race and racism, are things I want to now begin addressing more directly in my practice. And so leading into kind of what I'm doing next, or thinking about next, is again, consuming a lot of Black art history, Black poetry, just really immersing myself into that. And then connecting with other Black or Brown artists who are already doing that work, and seeing, okay, what's missing? Where can I fit into this sort of conversation? I think of Bernard Kinsey. I don't know if you were able to see the Kinsey collection. I know they had it at SoFi and at the Weissman at Pepperdine. But essentially, him and his wife, from very young, I think 20s, they've been collecting artifacts and writings from Black people, Black Americans, for the past, I think, many decades now. I don't know how long it's been, but they've amassed such a collection that it's now on view in multiple museums, and it really fills in the gaps, or what Bernard Kinsey calls the myth of absence. Basically,
so
it doesn't exist unless it's the myth of absence, meaning people can say, oh, we don't see it, we don't know about it, so it never happened, or Black people really weren't as involved in the making of America and in American history. And so reading, those texts, and then even considering my own ancestry and learning more about those stories in my family has really been where I'm at right now, building on those narratives and understandings of like, who are we? What did we do? How do we fit today? And so I know my next project is going to be or maybe next few projects is going to be in relation to that general idea. Conversations will be a little bit more pointed towards Black creatives and their own narratives, their own experiences, their processes in moving through art spaces, and then this world as a Black individual. So hopefully that answers your question. So it wasn't always the case. I think I had to come out of my shell, not even just in race, but being also queer identity and all sorts of things that I had to sort of filter out for to accommodate other people, accommodate religion, whatever you want to call it. I think I'm still on that journey, as I'm sure a lot of us are, and as I'm on that journey and having confronting those things, I know it does shape my creative mind and practice and what I'm willing to, tackle, or brave enough to tackle. There you go.
Well, for sure. And this journey certainly does require quite a bit of courage, depending on where you start the journey from, right? And what I love about your story is that I think you really demonstrate that um, anyone can start anywhere, right? The point is, as you continue to learn more, what do you do with the knowledge as you gain it, right?
Mm,
And so it's never about exactly like where you started. I find that a lot of people, even if they express interest in trying to understand matters of race or trying to understand how to engage in the work, whether it be full on advocacy or whether it just
mhm,
be simply just trying to gain knowledge, no matter where you are in the journey. I do find that some people get stuck in the
mhm,
beginnings of it, right? And the sense is, oh, I don't know enough, or I don't think I have anything to contribute. But my point is always that everybody has the next step that they can take in the journey,
mm,
and it's not about where you started necessarily,
mhm,
and our stories are kind of similar. And I grew up in predominantly white suburban spaces, and also had to um, learn how to wrap myself in love with the skin that I had,
mm,
and understand, like, and not just, I know I've never had an issue with my skin necessarily. It was more so um, trying to fit in. When you're younger, when you're a kid, you just want to have friends. You just want to,
mhm,
be part of the groups that are around you for the most part. I think adults as well, but like particularly growing up and
mm,
feeling a sense of like shame about difference, and
mm,
as you get older, you learn to appreciate uniqueness. But when you're younger, there's this sense of I'm not quite like everybody else because I'm the only black girl here. I can't do
mhm,
my hairstyles like the other white girls or whatever they're going to do. I'm always going to be that other one. And so you sort of build up this I don't even know what the word would be exactly. You sort of build up this habit of trying to do what you can to blend in where you can, to fit in,
mhm,
so that there's a connection and you don't feel as isolated. And I think for me, it just became so entrenched. If you're going to be
mhm,
accepted, if you're going to be loved, if you're going to be appreciated, you must be like this person, that person, these people,
mm,
and I really had to peel away those layers. And it took a long
mhm,
time. I had to, I mean, it's still unfolding. I really had to embrace,
mhm.
embrace self, embrace heritage,
Yeah.
embrace cultural identity. And it wasn't like I couldn't appreciate it, but it was just
Mm,
like, if most of my world doesn't look like this, then I probably don't want to be like that.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I had a lot of unpeeling to do, if you will. And then that's actually kind of where, good segue, kind of where Black Halos began to form. It was when I was asking those
mm,
questions about, well, why do Black people have to be considered fill in the blank? I
right.
was living in New York City at the time, and this was several years ago now, but I just remember I would go on these walks, and you would appreciate this. Like, I would be at the Met,
Mhm,
and then I was in this church in Harlem. I was a member there. I'm part of a dance ministry, and so sometimes when we are getting ready for dance prep, I would walk from the Met up to Harlem over to the church, and literally, like,
mhm,
from the span of like 1 to 2 blocks, you could immediately see the difference economically, going from like the super wealthiest of wealthiest to
mm,
like project houses and things being a little bit more run down. Of course, like Harlem's like super up and coming and all of that now, but just immediate transition, like the physical representation of so much of what's happening
mm,
within this country in terms of disparities. And I had to ask myself, why is it that I see the wealthier places are predominantly white, whereas if I go anywhere else, I see more people of color? Like,
mhm,
why is it that when I'm in white spaces, things seem to be a little bit more lively and like safe, quote unquote? What do
mhm,
we mean by that? Like, what's happened? These are the questions I was asking at the time.
right.
Not necessarily that they were well informed questions, but they were questions I had to ask, and ask myself, like, well, where do I feel most at home? And
Mm,
it just had to peel back a lot of those layers. So all that to say, I resonate so deeply with what you're talking about and about those aspects of your journey. And the thing you said about um, accommodating, like
mm,
figuring out how to accommodate certain spaces and accommodate religion and certain like faith-based places, church spaces. I don't think we said this, but you have, like, your family has like a history in like the church, and I think like your father, I think, is a minister or was a minister or something.
yeah, so
Yeah,
both my parents are
with their
pastors
parents.
in the Salvation Army. So growing
Yes.
up as a pastor's kid, so that's another element as
Yes.
well. Not just being Black and being a woman, a queer woman, but also just being a person in a church. I don't know, and sort of a
It's a
pastor's
whole
kid
thing.
and kind of those added unspoken like pressures of how you should behave and act, and you know,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
yeah.
Yes, the unspoken pressures is the point, I think, for me, in many spaces. And you said this word accommodating, and it feels like such a tragedy that we should feel that we need to accommodate spaces that aren't always hospitable towards us as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, that was the thing about Embreak, and has been the thing. We want to make hospitable spaces for people to come and be, as they are,
Mm-hmm.
to be whom you are, and to be able to make and create together, because we want to, um, not ignore and not necessarily only combat, but we also want to be able to highlight those
Mm-hmm.
unspoken pressures. Like, why do we feel we need to conform in certain spaces? Because the dominant narrative is that we don't quite fit in as we are fully. What is
Mm-hmm.
that about? So just that word that you said. Yes. All that to say, this is a lot of what Black Halos has been trying
Mm-hmm.
to. I don't like that form. I hate when people say that. What are you trying to do? Let's just say that we're doing the thing.
Doing.
That's what we've been enacting
Exactly.
through Black Halos. Yes, this idea that Blackness is inherently divine. You
Mm-hmm.
think a lot about like whiteness and how it's connected to a white savior or Christianity or this sense of rightness. But Blackness also, brownness as well, inherently has divinity within it. And our identities are worth speaking about. They're worth celebrating. They're worth sharing with people. They're worth not having them appropriated if we do share, you know. So please share your thoughts on um, listening to the EP, because I'm really curious from your curatorial perspective, like what
Mm-hmm.
stood out to you, what you picked up on in general. Just want to hear your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts.
Yeah, so I would call it, I guess, like a journey. You really took us on sort of, not even necessarily in order. I felt like with the first track, it started in the present moment with the Black Lives They Matter Here, which I recall
Mhm.
from Emergent. You'd mentioned, yeah, I recognize the audio from the protests.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, kind of having the listener confront with the realities of Black people, I thought that was really powerful. Um, and then into the two tracks I want to just kind of highlight were Collective Conscience and obviously Black Halos. And with Collective Conscience, again, I think it went deeper. So it's like, this is us, this is, we're existing, these are the challenges we're facing. But now, what are these collective scars? What are these, how is this generational, what have our ancestors kind of gone through, given the current present day that we're having to deal with. And there was just in like the composition of the song, sorry, getting nerdy now, but like all the
No,
melismas
it's
and sort
true.
of the rounds of, the repetitions in those lyrics of the scars on our collective conscience and deeply embedded cultural roots. I almost like related that to like the ghosts of our ancestors whispering to us, kind of
So good.
repeating those messages to us that we may not know. It's more of a somatic memory, which I think we were able to explore and break a lot too.
Mhm.
But
So good.
I would say, kind of with Black Halos and sort of the question of like, where do we go from here? It's helpful to know where we came from, and sometimes we can't really place it. So I feel like that what the power of that track could do was help me sort of place it somehow, even though I
Mm.
don't know everything that had happened prior to me. Um,
Mhm.
I wrote here, while we embody this collective and generational pain, it's within our DNA. I also see this connected to this collective joy and culture that also enriches our lives. So I think collective conscience as a whole, the scars, but also the joys and some of the life that Blackness brings, the
Mhm.
vibrancy, the divinity, as you mentioned, um, really stood out to me. And then I was also thinking about that's unknown or lost or what was taken from us. So kind of this unconscious, collective unconscious, I guess, things that we don't really, we can't really place, like I mentioned. Again, bringing it back to that idea of the myth of absence and sort of like the importance of art in this way to name or provide context, even if it's emotion or something in our body, to experiences that proves like, yes, this is happening or this exists or has existed. I think what Black Halos is doing, or what I experienced in the track and sort of the virtual, I can't wait to see it in person tomorrow, but is again giving that the other type of language, not necessarily verbal or visual, but now this somatic and this almost what do you call it, audio version of what we might be experiencing. So that's a little bit of it. I have a lot of thoughts, but I kind of want to give space if you want to respond to any of those ideas.
Well, just very, very briefly, but because I mainly do want to focus on your thoughts. But I will say, like, the journey that we go through in the EP is, in large part, like, there's an arc to it, because the EP stems from like the performance version, and so there was always this sort of flow and arc. But I love what the producer Alan Hampton did. He really is creating like these sonic landscapes, and
yes,
he just has a really beautiful way of doing this with his work. But he's finding the essence of what the words are getting at, and he's like pulling them out and then creating these worlds from these bits and pieces that he's getting from the words, and he has I love the word that you use, like, he creates a very somatic experience, like, through our listening, because he's telling a story through sound, right? Telling a story through repetition, telling a story through rhythm. And I love the many layers that he has on each piece. I mean, I say this often, but like, part of my joy in doing this is like being invited to listen to it again and again and again, because each time I do, I'm finding some other little tidbit that he added, this little sound over here that I didn't quite notice the first time, because it is so multifaceted. And I feel like he created a world for people to step into. I'll put it like this, like, the world was being formed, but he gave it another, he added some flesh to it, is what I'm trying to get at. The skeletons were there, the bones of it were there, and the room had been made, but he fleshed it out in such a way that, and I intentionally say fleshed out instead of like fleshed out, because he had a way of I'm doing this motion. See, I can't even get it out verbally. Like, my body has to do the motion.
No,
that's what he did. It's like, you can't get it.
And it was pulling memories and
Yes,
talk a little more about like collective conscience, but also finishing out the arc, because I kind of stayed there, but into this now acceptance and embracing of our divinity or our beauty, our Black halos. And I made a note here of this idea. It kind of connects a little bit to like Christ. It's almost I forget the word, but like the crucifixion story and resurrection story is sort of all these scars that we've endured, and now we're coming to life. Like Black Halos was sort of that resurrection into that like heavenly space that we should be allowed to embrace. We're made in God's image. We have new bodies, new lives, in Him. And even if you don't believe that fully, it's still that similar idea of like, okay, we're refreshed, we're renewed, we are fully in acceptance of who we are and can move forward in creating new things because of this vibrant realization that we have. So yeah, the EP, I loved it. I loved the experience listening to it a handful of times. And like you said, even every listen a little bit more was sort of brought to light, noticing musically what was happening. So
I love that you brought up the point about resurrection, because I've had this conversation with a few people, and we've called like the performance version of Black Halos like a liturgy, in the sense that it does have this arc of exploring the journey into death. This is getting super theological. Didn't mean to go here, but this is like, it's in the undercurrents of the work. I'm so glad you're here, Naomi, because we can have this kind of discussion. It's in the undercurrents. It's not like I'm intentionally trying to like map it out, but it's in the work, right? Because that's in a lot of ways, that is like the Black story. Like we have entered into this space of death, crucified, you know, hung up for crucified in this horrific manner. But there's this incredible grace, light, beauty that I see God shining on Black people and on the Black community, where God doesn't just leave us in a state of depravity, in a state of ruin, but there is this sort of renewal that happens. And I love to see Black people thriving and surviving, not surviving, but thriving, like going past surviving and being full of joy and life and just bubbliness, you know? And I see so much of God's hand in that. And I think you and I have said this a couple of times. I don't know if it was us, but we were talking about how like we're literally the actual embodiments of like previous generations, like dreams, right? Like I think about where my grandparents were just 2 generations ago, where they were, and then their parents before them, and how they would have, like if my grandmothers were alive right now. I just, you know, to think about you as well, because you're an educated woman and you work in academia as well, and like think about that, you know, to be educated, to have higher education, to be able to do curatorial work, for me to be an artist and to be free to do that, to be able to do the kind of work where we are seeking social healing, but from a place of groundedness, not necessarily a place of scarcity or overt oppression. You mean, we have our moments, but like that is literally the embodiment of somebody's dream, to step into that, right? And so I love to honor God in that, and how God has not left Black people in a state of despair or decay. There's so much work to be done, obviously, but so much work has been done. And even in this project, I want to honor what I see the divine doing with us as a collective. And then to like broaden that out, you know, what does it mean to be part of the United States? We're kind of in an interesting place as a country as well, you know, and what is it going to look like moving forward? How do we begin to make room for Black, brown, white included? You know, I'm not of the mindset of totally chopping off the white community. I think the point is for all of us to be able to find a place where we can thrive, you know? So I wanted to point that out, to say that I love that you saw the arc and the narrative, you know, you saw the flow and the liturgical underpinnings, if you will. I love that you pulled that out, you know, as an amazing curator would.
Well, and then I to kind of bringing it back to something like the world today, and kind of what we see with these sort of narratives regarding our pain or our joys. A lot of that has been, at least on the global stage, more commodified and sort of exploited in a lot of ways. If you think back to any police killing that was caught on camera and what's done with that visual, what those conversations do, sort of the denial even, all the way to, your favorite rapper or dancer or creative who's Black and their celebration there, but also coming down twice as hard if they slip up. And so not having as much room to move freely. Again, like I mentioned, both of us in our stories kind of having to put up a wall or encase ourselves so that we knew, okay, we're not stepping out of line. So I see this, this album, and then even in my own work, what I'm wanting to try to help create or encourage, if it's already happening, is us boldly entering space and taking space, and thriving in that space, regardless. And also taking ownership of our own stories, making sure we're telling our own stories, so that they're not, so that they're not up for grabs, I guess. If we have that ownership, then nobody else can really take that from us, no matter how hard they try. And so I see that in this work. Again, back to the collective conscience and kind of our scars, but also our joys and the things through our culture. Some of the memories that came up was, like Black women complimenting each other's hair, like we did before the call.
Yes.
Or, remembering tearing as our mothers combed out our hair, or using the hot comb singeing our necks, things like that. Like those experiences that we've all sort of it brought all of that up for me. But again, it's like, that's our collective conscience. We've all, one way or another, and I've seen reels too where people are like, oh, we all had the same lives. But in a lot of ways, like even in those small things, we've had the same lives. So how can we further connect those and then create space where individuals who may feel disconnected identify with their Blackness or with their humanity, even beyond that? How can we just connect in general? And so, yeah, and I know even in this work, but in general, I know when I see it, I feel affirmed, I feel seen. And I think there's a lot of good work happening. Social media is really helping kind of facilitate that. And in other media, we're kind of seeing that. But I still, there's still obviously work to be done. And those realities still need to be addressed, the tragedies. But I think it's also important for us to embrace the beauty and highlight a lot of that, so that people know, who we are. And
I love what you're doing with your, because you have you have two different Instagram accounts or maybe more, but I love what you do with your curatorial one and where you're highlighting different artists, because I do see also that you are including voices of people of color. And exactly what you said, there's a sort of affirmation that happens when you see someone else who maybe resembles you or has a sort of similar history. There is something very affirming about seeing that person put out their work. And I say this intentionally to say that for any creative people of color who have been making things but not sharing, please share, because you never know what someone looking at your work or hearing your work or reading your work, whatever it might be, you never know what they're going to take away from that and how they're going to respond. And the thing is that I always feel like an artist's job is not complete until the work is shared. That being said, I know there's some things you just do for yourself, but for me, art is always about some sort of form of communication. And my thing is always like, if you have things that you're doing, put it out there. Even if you feel like it's not ready yet, the work is not like, I don't have this sort of training yet, it doesn't matter. You really don't know what that's going to do for somebody else, because it is quite affirming and encouraging and inspiring. You see somebody creating and it just sort of pulls up this energy within you where you also want to make something, So I love that word that you used about how it can be affirming, sharing your work, for sure. And so I always appreciate when you share your work too, your creative work.
That I call out. I'm slow and steady, but it is important. And I do recognize, like, when I do finally feel comfortable sharing things, it is rewarding, if people reach out and say, oh, I really resonated with this. Or even in the last show that I did, having that more eyes on it than for maybe previous shows, and even having it reviewed, like, those are some big milestones for me and kind of affirmations for me just in my creative practice. And so that's what I like to do for other artists, is just saying, like, I see you, I love this, like, keep doing it. Because that really is what helps us continue and help people connect with that work. So,
well, I will just say, as one artist who has definitely benefited from your encouragement, it works. What you're doing definitely works. It's very appreciated, for sure. It's very encouraging to know there's somebody looking at your work and finding something of value in it and feeling, compelled to continue to share and talk about it, So much appreciated, for sure. Do you have any other thoughts you want to share about the EP, about anything in general?
Yeah, no, I just, again, loved this idea that you were creating, again, this collective memory. And I think even in break, we talked about, I forget, maybe it was Andrew Nemmer or Liberty, the question of how do we metabolize, like, 350 years worth
all day. I still remember that quote.
Love it. But that's really resounded in me. And truly, like, how do we begin to process? And I think this is one of the many ways that we can begin to process and also embrace, like I said, things I've already seen come to light. I think if you've seen the Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat exhibit at the Grand.
The new one that's up. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited. I have to go. I'm so
Yes. So again, these are things that are happening. So, if you're listening and you're a Black creative, like, also tuning, obviously creating and making, but tuning into what each other's doing and supporting and learning. I've been spending a lot of my time just reading about, different, who is it? Phyllis Wheatley, one of the first African American
Yes.
poetesses. She was enslaved,
Fun.
and just, just going down this rabbit trail of like learning and embracing like what have we done. I think that can add inspiration as well. And then the Basquiat exhibit was incredible. His family curated, or his sisters,
right? Yeah,
and it is worth seeing. But I would say it's sort of this listening to the EP, Experience Black Halos, has sort of affirmed for me of like, okay, this is still the direction I'm wanting to go, further understanding my own story, fleshing out my narrative, and then how do I tie in other Black creatives and their narratives to, who knows what it will become, or if it becomes anything. But it's just more for me creatively has been really rewarding and affirming in consuming this record. So thank you, Dia, for putting it together, putting it out, and I really appreciate that.
So grateful for you. Always so encouraging and inspiring. Thank you. Can you tell the people how to find you? Like if they want to follow up on the shows that you're doing, or just your work in general, how can they find you?
Yes, Instagram at Doxa, so DOXA_exhibit. That's where I post kind of updates on my art. Most people find my like normal Instagram, but it's truly my family. So if you like want to stalk, well, it's private, but it's more like my actual life. So I just recommend Doxa_exhibit to see any updates there, just my musings as a creative. That's where that lives. So I also have a poetry blog, The Wandress Black Spot. So that's also another place. I think I highlighted it on that Instagram as well. So
I will say, for those listening or watching, Naomi is an incredible writer. Oh my gosh. Beautiful way with words, through poetry, but also through prose, like your essays as well. Just a very insightful writer. And you write in a very poetic way as well, which I always gravitate towards. But I highly recommend following on Instagram, but then also following the blog. It's quite beautiful, for sure.
Well, thank you for that affirmation and encouragement.
So, it's the truth. Naomi, I so appreciate you. I'm glad we were able to do this. Thank you for being here.
Me too. Thank you for inviting me. This was perfect for a Wednesday.
All right, friend. Thank you.